Well, I think we can probably get started then. At least do some of the the intro things. Great. Well, welcome to our April 30th meeting. I appreciate moving the schedule from last week to this week. So thank you for your flexibility there. Um, so Keith had sent out the agenda. Any revisions or updates to the agenda today or any walk-on topics?
No, for me, no, just the reminder that there's a meeting that starts at 7 p.m. and they start up the meeting 15 minutes before for exactly the reasons we were just demonstrating why that's such a good thing to do. So we actually have only an hour and 15 minutes to do our work,
Okay.
approximately, just so you know.
Um, and one thing I just wanted to check in on, also that if we have time at the end, just making sure that the um, regularly scheduled meeting time, let's say, 5:30, the third Wednesday of the month is still good for folks as well. So I know we have some new members here, and just wanted to check in on that piece as well.
So is that a question or is that in addition to the
In
agenda?
addition to the other business, I guess, to add
Ah,
to
got
the
it. Yes, yes, yes.
agenda item.
Thanks. Got it, got it, got it.
Um, all right. So, um, March minutes. Approval of March minutes. Any changes or adjustments to the minutes from our March meeting?
I like them.
Okay, then we will approve the minutes as is.
I wrote them, so just full transparency there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So last time in March, we did have guests from the CCRPC come and join, both talking about the asking for the land use project feedback they had. And then since then, we've also had the housing targets were released as well, which should have all been shared with folks. So wanted to spend a little bit of time talking through if we had any feedback from the presentation, or anything as a committee that we want to raise or recommend in terms of what CCRPC had presented to us last month.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Um, we received in the materials the housing targets for each town.
Mhm.
Those are included in the agenda package, and there's a housing targets graphic document, which I can, if it's a SharePoint document and it lists all the towns and their different housing targets. And
Mhm.
I was pretty I looked at it and tried to make sense out of it and then realized that I didn't get the math. And then if I don't get the math, then I don't know, I don't understand what's going on. So could we take a few minutes if we just review the one page infographic, then we don't have to go through a whole lot of other stuff, although maybe my answer isn't all the other stuff. But it wasn't obvious to me. There were questions I had about our row, which is Richmond.
Yep.
And does everybody have a link to it? Yes. Murray does, and Andrew.
Trying to locate it right now in my file.
I'm gonna put the link, such as it
Thank you.
is, in the chat. Hang on a second. Chat.
Also just share the screen here.
Yep. Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
And that link in the chat should take you there, Andrew. So if you look at like highlight, yes, the Richmond piece, the you can't see all of the row headers. You might just want to jot one bit. Yes, like that. Perfect. So let me talk this as so it's my question, so I'll try to answer it, ask the question coherently. It looks like the first column after the word Richmond is we have existing housing units of 1,700, let's just say. Okay. Then there's 2050 housing target ranges where there are 3 sets of columns that go from low to high. And the first number in each of those 3 columns is the actual numeric total, and the percentage, I assume, is supposed to be the percentage increase over what we already have. Now, it says, let's just take low. So next to Richmond, it says 202 is our housing target low range. And then it says 12%. Now, 1700, 10% of 1700 is 170, right? So I'm trying to figure out, it seems like the
200
202.
and 202 units is 12% more than 1729. 404 units
Oh,
is 23% more
23%
than
more.
1729.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
And then that column over there, annual historical growth, we've averaged over the last 23 years, 8 new units.
Got
And the
it.
low projections are 8. So for Richmond to add 202 units, if we continued at our current pace of adding 8 per year, we'd add exactly 200 new units in the next 25 years. So if we just continue doing what we're doing in Richmond from a new unit perspective over the next 25 years, like we've done the last, we would hit the low gray column by
Mhm.
2050. Because if you, right now it's 2025, if you multiply 25 by 8, that equals 200.
Oh, I get it now. Okay, so the 202 is a 25-year total target. Divided by 25 is 8 units per year if the low was what we were able to achieve. And then it would be
Divide
6.
404 by 25 and you'll get 16,
It
double the
makes
rate.
sense. Got it. And then the same thing happens again with the next one over. I thank you, Andrew. I knew it had to make sense. I just couldn't figure it out. So, and is there is the goal to hit the middle? Is the goal to at least make the low? Is there a goal? It's
I
Yeah,
mean,
called,
there is an overall goal. And I think that based on my understanding of where they're at in this draft stage is sending this type of information to each town and saying, okay, what do you think? And some towns might say that's not reasonable. And if Richmond told them that's not reasonable, somebody would point to this and say, well, you've done it for the last 23 years. Why can't you hit 200 units over the next 25? And what tools do you need to increase that? Because some towns have different growth plans. I mean, Colchester is, you'll see from a percentage perspective, like where they're expecting the growth to come from.
Mhm.
And obviously, it's loaded in South Burlington because there's a copious amount of green space close to transportation. So a lot of these are transportation driven. Um, Essex and Essex Junction as well. They're open for business because they have a large sewer allocation. So part of their town plan targets substantial residential growth.
Got it. So we don't, so the document helps us understand what we achieve at different rates of growth and has an overall target and is a is the expected response that the town would say, hey, here's what we figured out we can do. We're going to have, in 25 years we're going to have this, or we have a statement in our town plan that says this is what we're going to accomplish in terms of housing, or something like that. It's like, what's the expected response from this document, or is there one?
I'm not privy to any of that information. My anticipation is there's some semblance of this is from Montpelier telling somebody else to tell us to do something. So what the end result is, but I don't think they've thought about the logistical steps forward from there about all crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I think they're still working through like the draft components of this, but that's just my understanding. I'm reading tea leaves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. I can't ask for better than that, Andrew. That was really super helpful. All right, I consider my question well answered. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, on this, I do see having some type of housing target as a benefit for us as a committee, right? To validate, to one, shoot for, to validate against our, our progress. Like, are we making progress as outlined by this XYZ goal? And I think three, it can help tell the story that um, this is how Richmond is being thought of as their expectation to participate in um in the housing challenge that we have here in Vermont, right? I think previously when we've talked about like how do we measure the success of this committee, right? It was um there was a lot of factors that we could go towards, but it would take a lot of extra, let's say, convincing of our community that this is the right target to go after, right? But now we have kind of an outside um source or outside body that said, hey, this is what we expect from Chittenden County, and this is kind of Richmond's share. And I also don't see it as like um as a maybe unrealistic goal if we looked at like the mid goal here as being unrealistic for our community. And that can also maybe help shape the conversation within our town that when people think, oh, we want to build housing in Richmond, um, uh, does that mean we're going to turn into a Williston, or we're going to turn into another community where there's, large buildings going up everywhere? And it's like, well, that's not the story that we're trying to sell, is that, hey, we will turn into a different, into some of our neighboring communities, right? We have challenges already that we've outlined as to like we don't have that land that's accessible as easily accessible by water, sewer, etc. So I think long and short of it is like I am happy that there is some type of target for us to shoot for, and my feeling is that it's realistic, looking over a 25-year horizon. It's not like, again, jumping to conclusion that we're going to be building huge skyscrapers in Richmond next week or tomorrow or next year. Um, that's my 2 cents on kind of the housing targets that came out.
I'd say one factor that I don't know would be considered into this just for us to be aware of, is based on a 25-year out window. There's a lot that's going to change to the current housing mix of 1729 units in Richmond. Pick any town. We're at from an infrastructure perspective, our housing stock is at will reach a critical breaking point in the next 25 years. Take a drive through a lot of neighborhoods and you'll see, old, poor use of land and, run down 800 square foot ranches. And they're going to get turned over or be removed from stock and not turned over. So there is we haven't seen it very much recently, flood damage too, at various locations, including Richmond. So there'll have to be some factor at play. I would hope they would anticipate this into the numbers, but based on basic math, they haven't. You'll lose in the next 25 years 5%, 3 to 5% are conservative estimates based on the age of infrastructure, because our homes are built around 1900. So the low end, I guess my point of that statement is looking at the low end of 8 per year probably wouldn't actually realize that 12% growth that they have there. It'd probably be much smaller. That's a real factor that is not considered here, which would lead me to believe it would be, to hit that 8, you'd have to lean more towards that middle target of 16 to actually really be adding, 8 units per year. If that all makes sense.
Yep, it
I mean,
does.
I think that makes sense. I take this though, and maybe this is something we need to validate, is that it says 8 or 16, but those are housing growth. And I do believe the CCRPC takes into account the units that come offline as well. So when they account for our growth, they're both asking for those that units that are taken offline for whatever reason, and then those that are added in there. This is the 8 per year would be the net of that.
So I have a question, Andrew. I thought that was really interesting, and I've been wondering what sort of like housing monitoring Richmond does. You know, some towns have different kinds of like registries for different types of homes. And it just sort of occurs to me, and it has really since I've moved to Vermont, because the housing stock is so old, like it seems like it's an important thing for us to be keeping track of somehow. And maybe it's not, you know, the entirety of the housing stock, but maybe it's at least some subsets. But is there anything that exists to do that? Okay.
No, they've tried to pass at the state level rental registries statewide, that would be administered at the state level. And rental properties, even long-term rentals, will be subject to state fire and safety inspections and fire and safety code. I do not believe that's been passed. It still sits in the hands of municipalities. Towns as large as Essex don't have any fire and safety inspections. The ones that do are Burlington, Winooski, and South Burlington.
Right. Yeah. So, and that feels like it's a part of the whole conversation around why monitoring could be helpful. But I also just think, you know, in terms of furthering the conversation, or really, you know, furthering the conversation we're having here about building more affordable units and or potentially serving a role as a committee that educates the public about what kinds of funding might be available from the state to, you know, improve their accessory dwelling unit or whatever other program is coming down the pipeline. Having some kind of way to monitor the housing seems important, even if, yeah. So it sounds like there's nothing here, but it's sort of something that's been coming up as I've been looking at the different documents that we've been floating around, which, you know, I can bring up when we get to those documents. But yeah, I wanted to check in just to see if there's anything, or if there's been any proposal or.
Well, what type of monitoring specifically are you talking about? Are you talking about just like new builds and units coming off the line and then adding, or like more detailed than that?
I mean, I think ideally I come from, you know, the sort of legal aid world where like rental registries could be a really important, you know, way to keep track of the rental units that are online, what, you know, what sort of habitability issues or not they have. But I think, you know, I think there's sort of a whole range of reasons that they are useful. Some towns are using them to track short-term rentals. It looks like some towns are using them to sort of track other things like gentrification. So I think like getting, you know, reaching that mid-level target, it's sort of, well, maybe theoretically it's going to benefit Richmond. You know, if those are a particular kind of unit, I think it has a different kind of value. So yeah.
I mean, I believe what I've seen, remember in like previous conversations, is that Richmond tracks new builds through like certificate of occupancies that are offered or provided, you know, and that's I don't know if it's permits or if it's the COs. And then I believe I remember that there isn't really a good way to track all the units that come offline, right? And so that right there could be part of maybe our proposal for strategic housing plan, is like, how do we track at least those that come offline? I think we might need to have more of a discussion if we want to go like beyond that, because it also just takes the infrastructure and the manpower to like track that stuff, right? And I don't know if we have the staff, right, in
Yeah.
Richmond to do
Yeah, and maybe,
things like that.
yeah, and when you say offline, you mean like fully offline, not offline to become short-term rentals or something like that.
Yeah, like they, house gets
They're
torn down,
dilapidated and
uninhabitable. Yeah, right. Because I think some of those they might just become uninhabitable, right? There's not like you have to pull a permit because your house is now uninhabitable, right? Hey, Virginia.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I didn't know that we were meeting or I mean, what happened with Connie's message? She sent a
Oh,
message saying,
yes, to stay tuned. My apologies. Duncan rescued us and got it going and made me host, and then I was taking minutes and I totally forgot that you might not have just kept trying the link. So I'm sorry, Virginia.
okay. And then
Uh,
I was in the waiting room for a while, but here I am. So
yeah,
Oh,
no worries.
yeah. Need to work on the system for sure. But thank you for hanging in there. I really appreciate it, Virginia.
Yep.
What we've talked about so far is the housing targets infographic that you see
Yep.
on the screen and what those numbers mean, which was helpful to me. It was a question I'd asked. And that we have something to learn about what these targets mean. Won't go through everything. Andrew was bringing up that we have some limiting constraints like infrastructure and aging housing stock, which took us into a conversation about whether we have a registry or inventory of housing and what it might take to manage that and what it might inform the town of if we did know that information. Very quick summary of where we've gotten to so far.
Okay, great. Thanks.
and maybe this is a question, maybe you know the answer, Virginia, but do you know if the housing targets here, I assume they take into like net growth, meaning if we have units coming offline, we would then need to build or add even more total units to hit the housing target, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
Yep. So this is the total number that is desired over and above what we've got. So if some come off, then you have to add more to replace those.
Okay. Okay.
But they're not wildly off base, by the way. I don't know if you talked about that, but
Yes.
Richmond has had 8 units plus permitted anyway in the last few years per year. So the planning commission didn't think that these were too crazy, like the first
No.
ones that they generated. So
No, in terms of Richmond's share, I don't think it's too crazy as you mentioned. Has there been any discussion at the PC level around the targets going after the low, mid, high? Is there a recommendation as to like what does a low, mid, high mean? And do we target the mid? Target the high? Is that up to the town to choose what they want to target? Is that like how does that?
So these are just aspirational, there's no teeth or anything in these numbers. So I think at the planning commission, we've just assumed that we're going to do the best we can, and hope we get the low number. And if we do better than that, then that's great. So, it's not entirely obviously within our control how many units we get each year. So we just continue to use the best advice to get as many housing units as we can and hope that at least we get to the low end.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have to choose amongst the targets. We're just going to try to do the best we can.
I mean, I would advocate though as a committee here that we choose a target that we would want to go after and kind of build a plan as to what we can accomplish based on those on that target. And to me, a mid target seems like one we should go after, but open to feedback here.
Virginia, there was a lot of other information in the folder that had CCRPC related data like a floodplain, not a floodplain, like a housing map, a future land use map.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that we should be looking at to understanding what we need to be able to do as we create the housing strategic plan and as we work on the town plan? Because that's our goal for this meeting, and I don't want to lose that. But should we be looking at any other information that's out there? Do you recommend?
So I think the agenda item was to look at the Tier 1B question, the future land use map, and the housing targets. Is that correct?
Yes. Based
To
on
make
those,
some kind of a statement or recommendation for the planning commission or for the regional planning or the select board, however we want to distribute it. So the Tier 1B recommendation is just, do you want to opt in or not, that recommendation. The housing targets recommendation is, are you okay with these housing targets? Do they seem realistic, like within the town's capability of doing these targets? So that's that recommendation going to either the planning commission to be incorporated with our recommendations or going directly to CCRPC. Yes, we're good with the housing targets, or no, we think they're way out of line. Tier 1B, yes, we think we should opt in or we should opt out. The future land use map question is more difficult because that's taking a look at the new framework that regional planning is required statutorily to use to make its map, and looking at the same time at our future land use map that is in our 2018 town plan, that we're thinking about what should we do with that? Should we have the same future land use map? Should we change our future land use map? These are kind of two parallel tracks going on at the same time, just because of the way it happened that this was the year CCRPC was supposed to make its new map. So what the housing committee should be doing is looking at those two maps together and saying, could they align? In other words, if you took our future land use map from the 2018 plan, is it similar enough that the regional planning commission would accept it as being on the same track that they're on? This is very amorphous because it's all statutorily prescribed and everybody's finding their way into it by themselves. There's no actual, it's all new, the way this is being done. So, what the housing committee should be doing is, okay, looking at the core part of the village, that's where we're targeting our most growth for. Well, yes, the future land use map in the 2018 plan, I don't know if anybody has looked at that, but it's the fuzzy map. And I don't know if anybody remembers back in 2018 why we had a fuzzy map. But we had a fuzzy map because we didn't want it to look like a zoning map. We wanted it to be kind of a general map, a vague kind of map. And I don't know if, at some point we should put it up on the screen and look at it. But basically, the village area is slated for the most growth. So that's compatible with the new framework map. The legend for that higher dense, the most purple part is the
Village center.
village center. That's what we have. And we have a village center designation. So that's where they got that information. And that is going to be slated under their categories of the core part of the downtown, which is the village center and the planned growth area. The planned growth areas, they took our village neighborhoods south, which you see is the light pink area down at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom of, yep, right there. They took that as being an infill growth area, and also the village neighborhoods north district, which is that other pink area, yep, that area up there. Those they designated as also part of the place where we want to have most of our density, most of our growth by infill. So, you know, that part is compatible with our map because our fuzzy map just shows this big blob around the village as being Richmond Village. So that could easily be mapped onto this map. The language is not exactly the same, but it's similar, you know, with the idea that most of the growth is going to occur here. Then there's the gateway, which they have as a transitional area.
What's the green?
The dark green is rural conservation. This new map, and the Planning Commission has also a lot of questions about this map, about exactly how it was arranged and how it was done. They used our maps and some other documents in order to make this map. I've looked at it, and there are some things that I think are kind of weird about it. But what Keith and I decided, since the time frame is so short before the draft plan is going to come out of CCRPC, we're only going to be able to say if it's more or less like our map. So the dark green is rural conservation. Now, we have not had a discussion in Richmond yet about whether we want these state priority conservation areas to be put into a district called rural conservation, which has special requirements about it. We haven't really had that discussion, but on our map in the 2018 plan, we do have that shown in green, which says significant natural areas. So, you know, it's similar. It's mappable from one to the other. So this whole area to the right of your screen is part
Really
of
hard to develop.
Yeah, it's really hard to develop, and you know, it's a forest block, which by law, Act 171, we are trying to preserve forest blocks to maintain 30% of Vermont land as open space. It's got habitat connectors, it's got biodiversity concerns, so it may well be that we end up making an actual zoning district that is a conservation district. This is where it would be, because this is mapped on the state Vermont Conservation Design, on BioFinder, which is a mapping system that plots the highest priority natural areas. So in general, this is where our green on our map is. It isn't divided up by parcels just like this, which is what we wanted to avoid in our town plan map, was to have parcel lines on it. But Regional Planning Commission is using as their base map this parcel map that has parcel lines. And, you know, you can see, like, just to the north of Richmond, there's green that overlaps with other colors on the same lot, you know, and we're not going to have a zoning map that has parcels, half in one district and half in another. So it's not exactly transferable from one map to another, but it's similar enough that, you know, I mean, Keith and I just don't feel that we have enough time by the time this draft map is produced, which is like next month, their draft map, CCRPC's draft map. We don't have time to look into every single one of these parcels, which are divided, or, you know, it's not possible for us to do that. So we feel like we're just going to say, well, that green area is sort of where our green area is on the map. You know, the conservation land along the river is sort of where we have either really conserved land, you know, with easements and everything, or it's in the floodplain and our floodplain doesn't allow development there. You know, it's similar enough that we're feeling that this is probably, unless somebody does a lot of work on this, I'm going to have to say that it's adequate to be, that our map is adequate to be transferred. We have.
So what does that mean then? So like, what's the impact of that? Then is this map coming from like Montpelier saying, okay, Richmond, you agreed, this is what you got to do?
Well, it's not coming from Montpelier, it's coming from the regional planning office, our Chittenden County Regional Planning Office. They have to approve our map. But this is not a zoning map. So there's no actual teeth in this map.
Wow.
And, you know, Keith and I have talked about this a lot. Does this commit us to anything? If we say we're okay with this map, which is kind of like our map, does this actually commit us to doing anything particular with our zoning or anything? And we think that that is not the case. We'll look into it a little bit further, but
I would say that I could like to play devil's advocate, and I'm not.
yes,
I'm just telling you what like a developer will think looking at this is they'll then leverage this and say, but look, this map, it's light pink on my parcel, and you guys said you agreed to this. And all of us, even on this committee, including myself, might not think it's a wise idea, but the map's there. And then it's like, well, he said, she said, it doesn't have teeth, but it kind of does. So it's just an interesting
yeah,
scenario.
yeah, it is an interesting scenario. I totally agree with you. Our options are we can say something about it, or we can not say something about it. And if we don't say something about it, and probably even if we do say something about it, they're not going to change it. So this is the map that they have arrived at with their work, and this is what they're going to use unless we say, you can't do that, you can't do that, this is wrong.
Now,
And what's
wasn't
the
there,
light green? Not the dark green, but the light green. I
The
didn't see
sort
the
of
key.
bluish
Yeah.
color is
Rural ag. Okay.
rural ag. So there are currently 4 categories of rural land: rural general, rural ag, rural conservation, and hamlet is kind of grouped in with their like open space designations. And also the resource-based recreation area. If you look at the very, very pale blue, that's Cochrane's ski area. And they have called it a resource-based recreation area, which is suitable. You know, we have in our map that as being adaptive agricultural residential. Well, I don't really even know what that means, but I know during the 2018 plan discussions, we talked about allowing for more commercial type activities on ag land to allow, you know, people who have ag land to survive, to run their businesses. So the fact that this map has put, let's see, where this very light blue, right in the middle. Yeah, that's Cochrane's. They have called it a resource-based recreation area, for which they have developed criteria, and the criteria look suitable enough. It's open space, but it has a recreational use, and there are going to be certain commercial uses, which they already have: skiing, mountain biking, maple syruping, those kinds of things. They have it on there. So I'm open to suggestion about what this committee wants to do with this map, because nobody really knows.
I'd
I
say
mean,
there's some key. We can look at it from a parcel perspective. There's three critical parcels that in the next 50 years, if a water sewer system ever got expanded, are unbelievably perfect for all the housing we need to meet all those goals. So they're near the mobile park. They're on Governor Peck and Browns Trace, Jericho Road. Those are the two corridors that are so close to the village that are interesting parcels. And I don't know what the history is with them. There could be history, and I don't know. And I don't want to. We don't need to get into the mud on that. But I would have
Right.
comments on, like, right next to Sadler Meadow. You could put 40 lots right there.
is that
So
like huge?
that's over to the left of the map, right? We're talking about the
It's
left-hand
like
side of the map.
Because this is
well, right now we're looking at it's in the top right center. Keep going, keep right there. Back the big no, the big ag lot. That's one of them. Yes, that's over on Governor Peck.
Yeah.
And
this
that
one,
one right there. Yes,
this one, yeah.
those
Yeah.
are
Okay.
like, I don't know if there's history. There could be history. I don't know if it's conserved or there could be deeded history on them. But that's just really, really ripe corridor.
Okay,
That's,
so they're in the light blue, right?
Yes, that
Yeah.
one that he's
So,
on. And the
that,
other lot just sold. So the other one over there sold. That's got multiple. They're putting a bridge in or something over there
Is that like
on the
across
left. Nope, on your other side, Governor Peck. Yeah, then not that one right there. That's sold recently. I'm of the understanding.
so go to the table, the legend, Mark, if you would, and see what that light blue says.
That's the rural ag.
Ag, and forestry. So we could say that we wanted that, for instance, put in a transition zone. That would be something that you might wish to do.
It just seems like when you look at this map from 60,000 feet, that's like there's so many houses all around those parcels. That one there is very easy. There's no infrastructure there. It's already been logged.
that's,
They just mow the field. They don't even bale it. They don't even
that's,
farm it. It doesn't look
that's
like.
that's Danny Pete's farm, right?
Do they
I
do any
believe.
agriculture anymore there?
He used to have heifers on it, but he hasn't had that since before
Yeah,
COVID. And
got logged last year.
he's currently trying to develop a lot above, on the left side of that block to, for a new housing unit, but there are complications.
Okay.
So each one has a story, but
Right.
they're privately owned or they're part of someone's estate, and you have to go into each one and explore it. And I know that area a little bit because I live in that group of yellow band of houses there, but I don't. So it's so just backing up a little bit, the housing committee is sort of like a promotional group to say, how can we help the town of Richmond have enough housing for all the people who are here and all others who want to be residents? And we aren't the zoning commission. We are sort of a promotional group that is learning and understanding how to do that. So so I don't know if the housing committee has anything to add to the map, this future land use map, or the tier 1, tier 2 table. But if there is something we could do, Virginia, will you share what it is so that we could, because otherwise we're just like passing around our opinions here in this small Zoom room.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm interested in Andrew's suggestions about looking at those parcels and seeing if we want to try to give them a different designation.
Yeah,
Do
she
we
asked for
want?
feedback just on like how this lays out. So I mean,
Got
I
it,
Yeah,
just wanted
got it,
to,
got it.
I mean, it just
I'm not
requires
trying to
people
make,
looking into it. The housing committee can definitely have a recommendation. Look at this, look at the way this map is. That the only problem is the time that we have available to us to think about this and the expertise. Let's see, the light blue was rural ag, I think.
That's right, yep.
So here's what rural ag, the statutory description of rural ag. Oh boy. These areas include blocks of forest or farmland that sustain resource industries, provide critical wildlife, scenic beauty, contribute to economic well-being. Development in these areas should be carefully managed to promote the working landscape and the rural economy, should address regional goals. I mean, it's all like, could be anything. While protecting the agricultural and forest resource, habitat and movement, outdoor recreation, flood storage, etc., contribute to the economic well-being and quality of life. Development should be carefully managed. That's rural ag. Transition, there's rural general. It could be in rural general, which is that the light beige color? I don't have a color.
Yes, it's the light beige, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe instead of having it in rural ag and forestry, they should be in rural general, which is, development that is compatible with productive lands and natural habitats. This may also include an area that a municipality is planning to make more rural. I mean, the framework that they have developed, to us, none of the categories seem that useful, kind of. And we have to try to make it, our map, at least compatible with this map. So we could try to make these into transition or infill areas, which might be possibly planned for growth, but they're not right now. They don't fit in planned for growth because they don't have water and wastewater. So they don't qualify as being planned for growth, but they're transitional areas that might possibly at some point become planned for growth.
So does transition mean they've already been designated as planned for growth, or they might be in the future?
Transition means they might be in the future. So that's what the gateway is.
Yeah.
We called it
Yeah.
a transition area because it doesn't qualify to be a planned growth area because it doesn't have water and wastewater, and it doesn't have a connection to the village. Those are the things it has to have to be a planned growth area. But it's a transitional area because it might in the future, their existing or planned growth or residential uses, standalone or near a village, they are planned for possible public water or wastewater or both. And the intent of this category is to transform these areas into either residential neighborhoods, higher density mixed-use settlements, through new development or redevelopment. So, if there are other areas that make some kind of sense to be called transition areas, we could do that. We could change that if we thought it was suitable.
So a question, Virginia.
Yeah.
Is there any advantage to rural general over rural ag in terms of its developmental potential?
Well, if you look, I think the framework was sent to you guys, but if you look under rural ag as opposed to rural ag has more emphasis on the ag and forestry component and protecting those components. Rural general is like a leftovers category. It includes areas that promote the preservation of the traditional working landscape. They allow for low density residential, limited commercial, that is compatible with productive lands and natural areas. So rural general is just a little less emphasis on the ag and forestry part.
Oh,
But
Can
it allows development, residential and commercial development. It says low density, but frankly, what our high density residential area, the density there is very low density. So,
so is it a difference that makes a difference if we were to suggest take some of those rural ag areas and turn them into rural general? Would that be considered useful, or does it really not make any difference?
it is hard to know. That's all I can say. It's just hard to know whether it actually makes any difference or not. And we can ask regional planning about that. Does it really make any difference what we do? I mean,
Well, I mean, Danny
they're
Pete,
struggling with this as well, by the way.
okay, so not to speak for my neighbor, but Danny Pete's a farmer who has the Pete farm, which hasn't been farmed in a while,
Yep,
and he seems to be looking for ways to turn parcels of that into more housing, like he did for Sadler Meadow.
right.
And and there were a lot of rules about what he had to do in order to make that happen that were um, complicated and difficult. So yeah, you're in that area exactly, Mark. And so if the purpose of us is to for us is to say, how can we make this appropriately easier for people to develop?
Mhm.
If it's easy, so he's in rural ag right now, using him as an example, and not being him, so not being able to speak for him, would he have an easier time converting his former farm into a residential area if it was rural general? I don't know,
Or
but
transitional.
or
Yes.
transitional yes. Um, although I thought it doesn't have to have water and wastewater yet. Okay, so that would be a great conversation with Danny. And personally, I could help facilitate that because the man is my neighbor. And, we talk about stuff like this, like,
Right,
how he's doing and what he wants to do.
right,
But probably neither one of us knows the degree to which turning from rural ag to transition will help him. It sounds like it could, but you'd probably need to get a lawyer or somebody involved to give an opinion about whether or not that's a worthwhile thing, and that'll take time.
right. Well, I mean, I think this is the perfect thing for the housing committee to be doing, is thinking about stuff like this. It's good. Nobody is going to be able to tell you the exact answer because even if we make it transitional, you still have to have the zoning. But the zoning comes from the map, from the town plan. That is where the zoning is supposed to spring, other than the statutory requirements. It comes from the town plan. So if we tell regional planning that we want this, for instance, to be a transitional area, then I think that's helpful. If the transitional area criteria in their framework, which they seem to be, are more amenable to developing it into residential uses.
It would make almost too much sense, really. I mean, that land's flat. It's a little rolling, but it's very simple. The parcel across the street from it's got solar panels up on it. It's too steep. There's no tangible value in development there. But
It,
just like it feels like common sense looking at an aerial map of where we should want growth. And I know a lot of towns focus on we want to drive and see houses and then see green space and then see houses. It just drags the problem out further into the rural areas of Richmond. I don't agree with Williston's growth philosophy at all because they have green space close to town, but then they're pushing out the sprawl. And
Mhm.
sooner or later there'll be backfill into those areas and then you're covered. So it's a half mile from the village. It just seems like such a really smart place to
It's
make a transitional zone like you're talking about and encourage somebody and make it easy for them to,
Right.
because they're not going to farm it, and there's no farmer that's coming along that's going to use that 30 acres to have cows. They're just not. It's too valuable of
yeah.
land to put cows on it.
Well, it floods every spring, so just to let you know, it has its issues. But is there a to-do out of this? Is there like a request for me to go, would it be helpful for me to talk to Danny, to bring Danny to one of our committee meetings? I know that there was a sense of urgency in Virginia's comment, so I'm just like, I'm happy to help. Tell me what would be helpful.
Well, I would suggest first for Andrew, since you seem to have the overview, is this the only parcel? Or are there some other
No,
parcels? Yeah.
there's
So
others.
why don't you pick out the parcels and make a map and show where they are on the parcels, and then we can know what needs to be done, if anything needs to be done. And we
Some of
can,
what I give you, you'll tell me to go pound sand because it doesn't match the town plan, which I'm not cross-checking everything with, and that's fine.
it doesn't
But
have to
from
match the town plan because we're working on the
yeah,
town plan. And the future land use in the town plan is the fuzzy map, which has a lot of fuzziness to it. And I'm trying to look on the town plan at that area. And
And
I
also,
think it's actually kind of in the high density residential area of
that's really
fuzziness.
close to town. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
So, what are the other places like the Far Farm or, I think the mobile home park is in that it
yeah, say
may
the
And the
farm
parcel
farm.
near the mobile home park, there's a parcel on Governor Peck that crosses over into Jericho. It's the same landowner. They own
mhm.
in both towns. And that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah, somewhere up and through there. That's a whole nother conversation about partnering with towns in these border straddling parcels because we have a couple of them in Heinsberg and in Heinsberg and Jericho that there's like a mixed benefit for any future opportunity, and one town might object and the other might not. So
Yeah,
that's a different day, different conversation.
right. So what I would suggest as a first step is for you to look at what areas do you think and look at the criteria. If you don't have it, the framework criteria for this map that tells you transition area, what that is, ag general. They're very vague and they're not that helpful, but my sense is that the transition area is supposed to be one that is going to be better for development
Someday, yeah. The
someday.
someday thing, right?
And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to necessarily have community sewer and water, but it has to have soils with the potential for having community septic. I think that's what the transition area framework says. But, it makes perfect sense to me that the housing committee would look at these maps and say, well, this area in 50 years is the place that we want development.
Okay.
So that's what I would recommend that we do first. And then Connie can, then we can decide what's needed. Do we need to talk to these landowners? Maybe, I don't know, but this is not a map that has any teeth. This is not a zoning map. And this framework gives us lots of leeway in exactly what we have for zoning and what we have in our town plan, which we're also trying to work on, the future land use map in the town plan. So, yeah.
Virginia,
Andrew, does
can
that
I
give
just,
you?
sorry, I just am wondering, when is your next conversation with the CCRPC in which you're submitting Richmond's sort of commentary on the map, the tier 1B, and the housing targets?
Well, ASAP. We can,
Okay.
they'll meet with us anytime. Maya Balasa is our CCRPC planner who's been assigned to us. She will meet with us anytime. She will come to your meeting. She will come to our meeting. They are proceeding on a timeline that was given to them by the state legislature, which involves having a draft of this map like now,
Okay.
spring of 25.
Okay.
They will present the draft map when it's ready, spring of 25, which will be another time. They're asking the towns to give commentary before they formulate the draft map. That's the best time to give it. That would be now. After they present the draft map, they will bring it back to the towns and ask again for us to have commentary on it. So there's kind of an opportunity then. Obviously, this is the best opportunity before they
Yeah.
make the map. After
Maybe
they
even
make the
sort
draft
of
map,
vague flagging. Yeah.
after they make it, they're a little committed to it, you know, and then by like September, this map is what they're going to use.
Yep. Okay.
So the time is short. That's
Okay.
the problem. But I think if within the next, you know, I mean, Andrew, if you wanted to put this together in the next like week or something like that, you're not allowed to talk about it with this whole committee. We're not allowed to talk about it over the email. That's not allowed in the open meeting law.
I have
But
plenty of opinions without talking about it.
yeah, I mean, you know, put it down on a piece of paper, send it to Keith, you know, maybe one other person. Let's see, there are 5 people on this committee, so you can't have more than 2 people. You can't have a quorum talk about
Right.
something, but you could talk about it with one other person on this committee. And we can talk about it with Keith. You can talk about it with Keith anytime. You could talk about it with me. And then,
Well,
you
you
know,
could
we could think about what's needed and then see, because if we only meet once a month, this is a problem. We can't get anywhere. You know what I
Well,
mean?
we could meet more than, more frequently for a particular reason, for a very focused reason. Andrew can also individually send whatever he's thinking of it to each one of us separately, and we can respond to him separately. We're allowed to do that.
I don't
My
know if that is
question,
true, Connie. Is that really true?
it's just
Everybody
be true.
allowed to respond to the same
No,
thing?
no. It's Andrew sends something to me. He doesn't copy anybody else. He just sends it to me, I send it back. He sends it to you, you send it back. He sends it to Murray, she sends it back, etc. So
Can
he
you
can
make sure
get
that's okay before we start doing that? Can you talk to Keith about that and make sure that's okay? Because
Sure.
everybody is commenting on the same piece of information, even though they're not talking amongst themselves. They're all
Yeah.
working on the same piece of information,
to
not
provide
in a,
feedback to Andrew. But I will ask. I will
Yeah.
ask. Absolutely. You're
Yeah.
right to ask.
that would be good.
But I haven't heard Andrew say yet that he would be willing to do this. So, Andrew.
Yeah. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Virginia, look at this map, identify just from my perspective, from a development standpoint, what makes sense, understanding we don't want to develop the entire surface of Richmond, just what makes sense from a growth perspective. Because I've been talking for 2 years about the 50-year plan.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? Yeah, okay. That's
Yes.
no problem.
And also look at, since this is the CPRPC's map, look at their framework document. If you don't have it, I'll send you a copy of the description of each one of their categories, just to make sure that you know exactly what it is they're saying about this category. There's a lot of overlap and there's, but you just want to make sure that if you're recommending a piece be made transitional, that you know what the transitional zone is. If you want to change something from ag, residential, or whatever it is, rural ag to rural general, that you've looked at the difference between those 2 categories, right?
Right.
Okay.
Can you, just to make sure I'm looking at the right information, if you have it easily accessible, feel free to email me those links.
Yes.
That PDF.
Yeah. It's Act
Thank you.
181, Regional Future Land Use, and there's a framework picture, which is sort of useless. But the descriptions of each district, I think, would be good if we're going to say we want this out of this district and into this district. Then, you know, it would be good to know exactly I'll have Keith send those to you.
Okay. We have maybe a little bit over 10 minutes before the people who are going to use the Zoom platform next starts showing up and get ready for their meeting. Do we want to consider another meeting prior to our May 28th meeting? And I'm sorry to bump ahead, Mark. You can shut me down if you
Yeah.
want to.
No, that might be a good idea, only because we didn't really get to the other agenda items that we had today as well.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have a lot to say about those other agenda items too, so probably another
yeah.
meeting would be good.
So maybe calendars out?
Okay.
I cannot do Tuesdays or Thursdays. I'm open mostly other than that.
I'm
And I
available.
really would not like to do Wednesdays because now I meet every Wednesday. But if it's 5:30 to 7, so I have a meeting to go to at 7 that I have to go to at 7 tonight. So I could, if that's the only time other people can meet, I can meet from 5:30 to 7 or 6:45.
I'd
Monday
like to
would
move.
work great.
Monday would.
Monday would be good for you, Andrew?
Yeah, and it sounds like Virginia as well.
Yep.
All right.
As long-
So Mark mentioned that we might be talking about potentially moving the time of this meeting. I can make it work. I signed up for this committee when I knew it met at 5:30, but a 7 p.m. start time is always going to be easier for me just because that is bedtime. So my toddler will be in bed by 7. So it's just less of a trying to figure out if I need a babysitter because my partner's not home or what. So if we did like a Monday at 7, that's definitely something that I could do, at least for this next meeting. But I could also make Wednesday at 5:30 work if necessary for this next sort of interim meeting.
So I can
7
make,
7 is always better for me on Monday, and there are a few Mondays that I have to be at the select board if they're talking about a planning commission matter, like the 5th
Right.
of May. I have to be at the select board, so I wouldn't be able to do that
So,
Monday.
the
But otherwise,
select-
Monday.
select board meets the first and third Mondays. So could we do the second Monday?
I could do, so Mondays I have scouts with my kids from 6 to 7.
Is this a permanent change or just for like a next meeting?
Maybe given the time constraint we have now, we could just talk about the next meeting, and then at the next meeting we could talk about going forward.
The next meeting after that.
Yeah.
So the next Monday, that's not a select board meeting, is the 12th.
Well, I could do like a 7:15 start or a 7:30 start because I need to get back from scouts.
So 7:30 to 9.
That would
That
work
works
for
for
me.
me.
I see nods. Okay. So I'll notify Josh and Keith and Duncan that we'll be meeting at 7:30 on Monday the 12th.
Yeah, that should work. There's only a police governance right there. You never know with the select board, they might do other stuff, but right now that should be fine.
Wonderful, Duncan. Thank you so much.
We'll double check all the ducks, but yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, and make sure everybody's not after the same Zoom links.
No, that's what I was just checking. It's like we don't
Right.
have any other
Yeah.
meetings miraculously that Monday, so like we do tonight. So
Yeah.
so that Monday looks good. That's where my ear pricked up. I was like, oh, let's listen in here. So
Okay.
Okay, great.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, I just ask that we respect the 9 o'clock end time because that is my bedtime and I have to put myself to bed. So as long as we can keep within the window, we should all be truly happy and also have good days the next day. All right. Back to you, Mark. I'm so glad we've got a date, and I'll confirm with everybody that's not here, like Nick, so he knows it too.
Okay. So yeah, to wrap up today, I think Andrew, you have the ask that you have on the plate. So for next meeting, we'll talk through what you've put together, and obviously feel free to talk to Virginia and or Keith in the meantime. And then I think we'll carry through the rest of the agenda about the tier 1B exemption, and then the strategic housing plan. So on the housing plan, Virginia, I know that the last section there, there were some notes that were added around some zoning recommendations. Is that something that, do we have more future looking recommendations that, well, it's not something that maybe it's like the PC is working on today, but like, what do we want to accomplish or recommend from a zoning standpoint? Or should we pull those from the housing report? I'm just trying to think through for next meeting. Is there some more that we can work on in that particular section around the zoning recommendation?
Well, what I would like to do is, first of all, to take those two documents together, the strategic housing plan, which I'm not sure exactly what its ultimate use is, but we could find that out, and the report about the 2018 plan that the Housing Committee is submitting to the Planning Commission. So in the town plan report on 2018, some of the action items have been talked about and others have not. So we could talk about all of the action items and say, do we want this? We don't want this. We don't like this. So those are the action items from the 2018 plan. Then your final page of that document, Mark, has some general discussion about the future, what we would want to like to see in the town plan housing section in the future. So we could formulate those into action items so that we could submit an action item. And many of these will be taken from the strategic plan, you know. Also think about whether or not we want to add more goals. In the housing section right now, there's one goal. There's have housing, diverse, etc. We know that CCRPC has found a deficiency based on the new statutes in the affordable housing component. So we could think about whether we want to have a whole goal that's just about affordable housing and put in some of those recommendations out of the initial assessment from CCRPC of our plan deficiencies, which I think the Housing Committee all got. And whatever else we think from our strategic plan are going to be useful for having a meaningful section about affordable housing. We are now statutorily required to have a concrete plan about how we're going to address low-income housing. So we're going to have to put some things down, and many of them we can take out of the strategic housing plan, you know, build the environment that favors housing, etc. So that's, I think, what we need to do with those documents. And we can think about whether the things from the strategic plan, like all of Connie's section, there's some very specific and arduous, in my mind, things there. You know, how are we going to do these? Are we going to make that as a goal? Like, is one of the action items on our goal for housing to have 1 to 2 events per year related to housing? Really, are we going to be able to do that? I mean, that can be our aspirational strategic plan, but is that transferable into the recommendations for the new town plan? You know, I mean, Connie, I think you could think about those things, all of those great things that you put in there for outreach. Can we do that? Us 6 people possibly do those things, you know, or should we have a more general statement about developing a set of things that we can actually do for outreach? So that kind of thing. Anyway, taking the strategic plan, which is a good document, I guess it'll live on our website, but take that and pick out the things that we would like to have as goals and action items in the new town plan.
Yeah.
So, those two documents can work well together, but they need a little bit of refinement. That would be great if we could do that.
Well, maybe I'll connect with you and we can talk through
Yeah.
that, make an extra.
That would be great, because I have some specific comments about everything you wrote into that report on the 2018 plan about how we'd like to think about that and whether we'd like to develop it more into a whole new goal. So housing would now have 2 goals. That's fine. And the other thing that we haven't talked about, and that will probably be beyond the scope of next time, is also, besides the action and goals, there's a narrative, the housing narrative. If you look at the town plan, there's a 2-page narrative that needs some revision. And in the almanac, there's a housing section that also needs some revision. And the steering committee for the town plan work is hoping that each committee, like the housing committee, can do that work also. But I think the first step is to take those 2 documents that were on the schedule for now and to see how we can combine them, which we'd be able to do.
Okay.
So.
Well, I know there's people waiting to get into the.
Yeah.
So,
And I have to run down to the town center for the steering committee meeting. Anyway.
got it. All right.
Go safely.
And we'll leave it there, and I'll connect with you, Virginia.
Great.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thank you all.
Go.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye-bye.